up, Raptors fans? Welcome to the Warriors Report. It's time to talk about the Raptors and playoff matchups. Now, it is to note it is going to be either the Boston Celtics or the Philadelphia 76ers. So I'm going to go in depth in today's video and break it down, break the numbers down, as well as talk about which matchup is the most favorable for the Toronto Raptors. So if you're ready to watch this video, make sure to mutilate the like button. It goes a long way in getting this video out. And if you want to hit the subscribe button as well, that'd be very much appreciated. So with that being said, let's get into today's video. Now, as you guys know, I do like to give out shout outs on my channel. And for today's video, the shout out goes out to John J. Click. So John, thank you so much for supporting this channel through your likes and comments. It is very much appreciated. Now let's take a look at the NBA standings as it currently stands. As I mentioned, it's going to be either the Boston Celtics or the Philadelphia 76ers, but I want to quickly break this down in simple terms. So the Raptors have 1 game remaining, the Philadelphia 76ers have 2 games remaining, and the Boston Celtics have 1 game remaining. So for the standings to change, the Raptors would have to win their remaining game and the 76ers would have to lose their 2 remaining games, which would move the Raptors up to the 4th spot, which would actually be a huge advantage for the Raptors, which I'll explain in just a moment. But let's talk about the Boston Celtics and the 76ers. Now, for the 76ers to move up to that 3rd spot and avoid the Raptors, well, they would have to win both of their remaining games. And all they really need, well, Boston, if they want to stay in that 3rd spot, all they really need to do is just win their last remaining game against Memphis. And Memphis, it is to note, are already locked into the 2nd spot in the Western Conference, so they really don't have an incentive to play their starters. So that would be the little bit of a, just give you a little bit of a gist of what it would require for each team to do to kind of just stay or whether they would move in the standings. Now let's talk about the Raptors and how they have fared against each of these teams during the season. Before we quickly do that, it is to note the Raptors do have a big advantage over both of these teams because last week, a few weeks ago, the Raptors did play the Celtics and the Celtics had quite a few players out when they were playing in Toronto. Now, it is to note they were personal reasons. Al Horford was out, Jaylen Brown was out, and Jason Tatum was out. And this is big because obviously Canada does have different rules in the US when it comes to vaccinated players. In fact, they're not even allowing players to enter Canada if they are not vaccinated. Now, reporters did ask several NBA teams whether or not their team was fully vaccinated. The only 2 teams around the NBA that refused to comment on that was the Boston Celtics and the 76ers. Now, obviously, that would be a huge disadvantage if the Celtics weren't able to play Jaylen Brown and Al Horford because Robert Williams is out. That would just leave them very thin on the front court, but also because Jaylen Brown is their 2nd leading scorer as well. So that would be a huge advantage for the Raptors and a disadvantage for the Celtics if they were to play the Raptors. And of course, Matisse Thybulle as well. When the Raptors just played the 76ers a few days ago, he was out due to personal reasons as well. That is to assume he's not vaccinated. So Matisse Thybulle is one of their best defenders, if not the 76ers' best defender. So that would be a huge loss for the 76ers as well because, as I talked about, if the Raptors are able to jump the 76ers in standings, that would give them 1 extra game at home, which Matisse Thybulle would not be able to play in. So that would be a huge advantage for the Raptors. But let's talk about the statistics here. Now, when you take a look at the Raptors versus the Boston Celtics and the 76ers this season, they have a 2-2 record against the Celtics. And their points per game, they're putting up only 103.7 points against the Boston Celtics, but they're also doing a good job of holding them to only 102 points as well. Now, when you take a look at the other side against the, the 76ers, the Raptors are 3-1, and they're scoring 109 points per game and holding the 76ers to 106.2 points per game. Now, I wanted to go a little bit more in depth and break down the numbers for you here. I wanted to go matchup by matchup. Now, in the 4 games that the Raptors and the 76ers have played, I want to take a look at some of the statistics like field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, free throws, rebounding, and paint. For those who may not be familiar, PITP is points in the paint, which would obviously is a statistic I really want to look at, considering the Raptors do have Pascal Siakam and Scotty Barnes, who really feast in the paint as well. So taking a look at some of these comparisons and comparing the numbers, the Raptors against the 76ers in the 4 games are shooting 43% from the field, 37.2% from the 3-point line, which is pretty good, and they're averaging about 20 free throws a game, and their rebounding is just very impressive because we had this notion that the Raptors may struggle against particularly a team like the 76ers who have a big man in Joel Embiid who's just very good this season, but the Raptors are still out rebounding them. And when you look at points in the paint as well, they're averaging 44.5 points in the paint. And when you take a look at the 76ers, they're shooting about 44.7% from the field, 38.7% from the three-point line. And of course, they're obviously going to average a lot more free throws given the fact that they have Joel Embiid, but also James Harden as well. They're averaging 27.5 free throws per game. And their rebounding numbers are a lot less than the Raptors. As mentioned, 39.5 rebounds per game and points in the paint. Now let's take a look and compare that to what the Raptors are averaging versus the Celtics. Now versus the Celtics this season, the Raptors are only shooting 41% from the field and only 27% from the three-point line. Now we know the Boston Celtics are a really good defensive team, particularly in the second half of the season. And when you take a look at the free throws as well, the Raptors are only shooting 18.5 free throws per game and 49.2 rebounds per game, which is pretty good. And points in the paint. This is very impressive because the Raptors are scoring 52.5 points per game against the Celtics. Now, when you take a look at the other side, the Celtics aren't doing that much better when it comes to shooting versus the Raptors. Obviously, the Raptors are a very talented defensive team as well, and they've also been one of the better defensive teams in the second half of the season. Now, when you take a look at the Celtics, they're only shooting 41.2% from the field, 32.7% from the three-point line, and the free throw percentages, the free throw difference isn't much, 21.2 free throws per game. The rebounding numbers are very similar, 49 rebounds, and even the points in the paint. Now, obviously, the Raptors do average a little bit more, but when you compare these numbers, it just goes to show how close these teams are and how competitive this series would be if the Raptors were to play the Celtics. They're very closely matched up in terms of player personnel as well, and even some of the numbers here. Now, I wanted to go category by category and look at some of these points per games, the wins, the three-point percentage, how many free throws a game they're averaging. And I want to check off which really out of these two teams benefits the Raptors and who they should ultimately play. So, of course, the Raptors do have more wins against the 76ers than the Celtics, and they're also averaging a lot more points against the Celtics, I should say the 76ers in total. And when you take a look at the points against, though, they're holding the Celtics to much fewer points than they are the 76ers, and their field goal percentage, of course, is a lot higher against the 76ers. The Boston Celtics, as mentioned earlier, are a very talented defensive team. So even the three-point percentage, obviously, this should come as to no surprise as the Celtics do a really good job against the Raptors, but also just in general defending the three-point ball as well. They're one of the best teams in the league when it comes to defending the three-point ball. So, of course, the Raptors are shooting a lot better against the 76ers in terms of three-point percentage. And when you talk about free throws per game, same thing. Again, all of these categories you check off are a lot better versus the 76ers than they are versus the Celtics. Rebounding numbers are a little bit better versus the Celtics, which shouldn't really come as a surprise given the fact that the 76ers do have Joel Embiid, who's an absolute beast this season. And also, when you talk about points in the paint, this one was a little bit surprising given the fact that the Celtics do have Robert Williams, who is a really good rim protector, but again, the 76ers also have Joel Embiid as well. He's a very physical body in the paint. Now, I wanted to highlight these categories to kind of just give you an idea of how the Raptors fare against both of these teams. So obviously, they have more wins against the 76ers. They're averaging a lot more points in total against the 76ers. Their field goal percentage, three-point percentage is a lot better overall versus the 76ers than it is versus the Celtics. And also, they're averaging more free throws in total versus the 76ers than they are against the Celtics. Now, obviously, they're averaging a lot more points in the paint, and also their rebounding numbers are better overall versus the Celtics, which is understandable. But when you take a look at these categories, I think it's fair to say that the Raptors would match up a lot better against the Philadelphia 76ers than the Boston Celtics. Now, of course, the big question if we did face the Boston Celtics would be who actually is vaccinated or not, because we actually don't know which player on the Celtics are vaccinated or not. But again, that would be a huge disadvantage. I'm still not a big fan of wanting to face the Celtics. I would want to face the 76ers because we also have a coaching advantage as well over them. We do have a coaching advantage over the Celtics, don't get me wrong, but I just think the 76ers overall would be a team that is a little bit more favorable in terms of play. They don't really have someone who can guard Pascal Siakam, for example, especially given the fact that Matisse Thybulle will not be able to play in Toronto, whereas the Celtics still have a lot of good defenders in Marcus Smart and other guys as well. So I think that's one of the reasons where I would probably prefer to play the 76ers over the Celtics. And I just think the Celtics individual defenders as well as individual personnel as well match up so closely to the Raptors. It's going to be one of those bloodbath series which ends up going to 6 and 7 games. So I think, again, that's not a disrespect to 76ers. It's going to be a competitive series versus them as well. I think they're not an easy team by any means, even though we have beaten them 3-1, 3 wins against them this season. The playoffs are a completely different beast. They do have James Harden. I know everyone likes to shit on him, but he is a very talented player. And of course, Joel Embiid as well. So again, neither of these teams are going to be easy, but if I were to choose one, I'd probably say the 76ers are a little bit easier to play, or personally, I would want to play over the Boston Celtics. But I do want to hear from you guys. What do you think of these statistics, and do they mean anything to you? Which team would you rather face in the first round? Would it be the Philadelphia 76ers or the Boston Celtics? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, guys, I do have a trivia question for you today. And that trivia question is, which of these players leads the league in total steals this season? Is it A, Gary Trent Jr.? Is it B, DeJounte Murray? Is it C, Chris Paul? Or is it D, Marcus Smart? So whoever answers this trivia question correctly first in the comment section gets a shout out in my next video. And I do have a giveaway coming soon, guys. I know I've been saying it. I will be presenting what you do have to do to get those giveaways in the next couple videos. So stay tuned for that. Again, I want to thank you guys for the 3,000 subscribers. It is very much appreciated. And that will be it for today's video, guys. So thank you so much for watching. And I hope you guys have yourselves a great day.